What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in this video, I'm going to make you guys an expert on Ezekiel Sims, because he is seemingly the main villain in the Madame Web film based on the trailer, although I think by the end of this video, you'll start to think like I do, which is that Ezekiel Sims is a red herring, and that the movie is going to tie together everything from Spider-Man, the video game, Into the Spider-Verse movie, probably Tom Holland's Spider-Man, the whole 9 yards. So, Ezekiel Sims first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, issue number 30, and he was introduced in a way that basically, 1, revealed that he knew who Peter Parker was, 2, he has the same powers as Spider-Man, and 3, he actually blew Spider-Man's wig off because he asked him this question, right? He said, "How did you get your powers?" Right? And Peter simply said he was bitten by a radioactive spider. The response of Ezekiel Sims is, "So here's what's going to blow your mind. How do you know that it was the radioactivity of the spider that gave you your powers? Or was it simply that you got your powers from the spider bite and the radioactivity was irrelevant?" Totally changed the Spider-Man mythos, because in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, issue number 32, we end up getting what is kind of the origin of Ezekiel Sims, although it's not really in depth. It's more that he just kind of got his powers while he was out exploring and got his powers from an external source. We didn't really get the ins and outs of it, and even to this day, I don't think we've genuinely gotten a full-on origin for Ezekiel Sims, although I may be incorrect in that. But what it also does is it ties in, 1, the idea of the Spider-Totems, and that 2, Morlun is hunting for Peter Parker. And what ends up happening is Ezekiel Sims basically presents Peter with a room that he can stay in until the threat is neutralized, or seemingly for the rest of his life potentially, and it'll keep him protected from Morlun and the Inheritors, or Morlun if you want to call him that. So how does all that tie together? Okay, now we'll talk about why the Inheritors and Morlun and all that matter here in a second, but one thing I do want to explain is that in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, issue number 4, is part of Marvel's original Sin event, which was basically this kind of huge revelation of all these things that people just didn't realize about their own lives, or things that had taken place in their lives. During this comic, we end up learning that there was a girl named Cindy Moon who was basically bitten by the same radioactive spider that bit Peter, and that she ended up gaining spider powers as a result. The kicker about all this is she was successfully sealed away in a room by Ezekiel Sims, whereas Spider-Man had turned down the offer, and that's why we had never seen her up to that point, because she was quite literally locked in a room somewhere. She ended up coming out and of course became a major player in the Spider-Man mythos, and her and Peter just couldn't stop banging. Like literally, they could not keep their hands off each other. But to tie in the idea of the Spider-Totems, Morlun, the Inheritors, all that kind of stuff, this is where I think the movie is going in terms of direction, right? So the idea behind this is that Spider-Man, as you know him, did not simply just get his powers from a radioactive spider. That's not really where it came from. That when Spider-Man received a bite from the radioactive spider, it tied him into a grander mythos that was actually created by a particular goddess that we didn't know about until we got to like Edge of Spider-Verse Volume 2 or Volume 3. But the thing about this is that with him having a bite from a radioactive spider, anyone across the multiverse who is bitten by a radioactive spider gets tied into something called the Web of Life and Destiny. So to explain this whole idea of like Morlun, the Inheritors, the Totems, all that kind of stuff, the way this all ties together is that, much like what we mentioned a second ago, Peter Parker, as you know him, did not simply just get his powers from a radioactive spider. He was actually selected by what's called the Great Weaver. And the Great Weaver basically holds on to and monitors what's called the Web of Life and Destiny. This is almost kind of like the Force from Star Wars, right? Except it only applies to people who are Spider-Man or Spider-Woman from across the multiverse, and it ties them all together. It's kind of the thread that runs through all of them. But every universe has a version of like the Scion, or the Bride, or the Other, or something like that. Those are just names given to the various avatars that are out there. For example, the Gatekeeper, according to Amazing Spider-Man issue number 506, is responsible for controlling mystical forces, right? Exactly what that means is relative to the story. The Bride, who of course is Cindy Moon in the main Marvel Universe, she's responsible for individuals who gain their spider powers by chance, right? So Peter Parker happening to be at the science exhibit and the radioactive spider just happening to be there and then coming down. You could argue it was destiny, or you could argue it was chance. Whatever the case happens to be, that's what Cindy Moon represents. So each one of them represents a kind of concept within how it is that an individual can become a Spider-Man or a Spider-Woman. But with Morlun and the Inheritors, these are basically a group that just traveled through the multiverse and hunted Spider-Man and Spider-Woman everywhere they could find them. And the reason for this is actually pretty simple, right? So when it comes to like these Spider-Totems, they exist as kind of like this almost mythical animal kingdom type thing, right? So that's why, like in the comics, for example, Morlun went to Wakanda and tried to attack Black Panther and then got his ass handed to him. So the thing to know here is that they feed on spiders because that gives them the most amount of energy. And honestly, according to them, it tastes the most delicious, right? So it's like why we all like ribeyes instead of T-bone steaks or like New York strips, right? Because they just taste the best. But with the multiverse itself, the inheritors travel throughout every single universe and kill every version of Spider-Man or Spider-Woman that they can possibly find. And so that's likely what's going on in this film, that Ezekiel Sims is a red herring, and that the role of Ezekiel Sims is actually going to turn out to be something akin to a mentor, that his role is going to be to show up to Madam Web and say, actually, you know, I'm going to pull a Nick Fury here and say that you're part of a much bigger universe. You just didn't know about it, right? And like, that's it. And then what it's going to do is it's going to introduce the Spider-Verse, which is the full collection of every version of Spider-Man and Spider-Woman from across the multiverse and tie them all together. The PlayStation Spider-Man, like Miles Morales from Into the Spider-Verse, any other versions of Spider-Man that we see there, probably Tom Holland Spider-Man, maybe Andrew Garfield, maybe Tobey Maguire. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know where Sony's going to go with it. But that's kind of the nature of Ezekiel Sims. I know we sidetracked here for a second, but the role of Ezekiel Sims in Marvel Comics was more as a mentor to Peter Parker, kind of teaching him the true nature of his powers, but also a way for Marvel to segue into this idea that there's much more to the entire mythos of Spider-Man and Spider-Woman in Marvel Comics than simply just being bitten by a radioactive spider and like that was it. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. If you guys are interested in learning more about Spider-Man, the Spider-Totems, the whole 9 yards, make sure you click this link to the playlist. It'll take you to our whole Spider-Man playlist where we cover everything, and we'll catch you all later. Peace.